Okay, I think it's time to get going here. My name is Frances Bernard, and I'm with the Department of Environmental Quality. I'll be moderating this session. The title of this session is Renewable Energy, Clean Energy Policy, and the Path Forward for Utah. We'll be hearing from Sarah Wright from Utah Clean Energy and Tyler Polson from Salt Lake City Sustainability Team. Each of the speakers will have 20 minutes to speak. And then, you know the drill, we'll have a Q&A at the end, and I'll make sure that we have 10 minutes for Q&A. We really appreciate if you hold your questions to the very end. And as you probably know, we have all the presentations available on the Summit website after the conference is over. And surprise, surprise, we'll be emailing you a survey to get some feedback on what you like and then some suggestions on how to make this an even better summit next year. So please fill out the survey. So first up, we have Sarah Wright. As I said, she's with Utah Clean Energy. She's the founder of Utah Clean Energy. She has a proven record of accomplishment in the promotion of renewable energy and energy efficiency within the state of Utah. As executive director, she has effectively fostered diverse partnerships with state agencies, municipal governments, industry, agricultural groups, and community groups to advance clean energy solutions. Sarah brings over 15 years of experience with Utah industry, where she also served as an environmental consultant, providing occupational health and ambient air quality permitting services. Tyler Polson will be the second speaker, and he joined the Salt Lake City Sustainability Team in November 2013. Prior to that, he spent 4 years working on energy and sustainability with Park City Municipal. Tyler's job responsibilities focus on mitigating municipal and community carbon footprints. He has been involved with projects in the area of energy efficiency and conservation, renewable energy, transportation, waste and recycling, and community outreach. So go ahead, let's give Sarah an applause and welcome.
Well, it's great to see you all out here, and I'm thrilled that you have hung in till the bitter end today. We have a big topic to cover, and we want to allow time for questions. Renewable energy and clean energy policy and the path forward, so not a small task. I'll skip the Utah Clean Energy slide if you were here for Megan. So Utah Clean Energy, I founded the organization in 2001, and we're a solution-based organization, and we're really interested in stopping energy waste, creating clean energy, driving renewable energy development, and making sure that we create an infrastructure, building infrastructure, electricity infrastructure, natural gas infrastructure, everything that plays together so that we can transition to super efficient and renewable-led economy. And I want to give a pitch for the Four Corners Wind Resource Center. This is a resource center that's funded by the Department of Energy. Utah Clean Energy runs this program. Megan Dutton is in the audience right there. She's the program coordinator. And we're serving as a hub to provide accurate information about wind development in the Four Corners states plus Nevada. So if you ever have any wind questions, find Utah Clean Energy, and Megan will help you out on that. So I want to give a little bit of context and talk about, just kind of think about why we're doing this, aside from all the benefits to clean air and sustainability and energy security. The IPCC does a report every 5 years, and in their report to policymakers this year, they ran some scenarios. And they looked at sort of the business as usual scenario, what will happen to emissions and what will happen to global temperatures if we stay on this business as usual path, and that's the red path. And the alternative, one of the alternatives that they ran was a super efficient, pretty quick transition to a clean energy economy. And you can see the difference in the two outcomes. The outcome on the left is if we follow the business as usual path. And they always give temperatures in degrees Celsius, but I'm going to put it in Fahrenheit for perspective so that we can see what it might look like at the end of the century. But the dark pink is 21 degrees warmer on average over the year. So in the poles, it will be 21 degrees warmer. Even if they don't have their models quite right and it's not that warm, that's really not a future that we want to leave our children. So that's really what gets me up every morning, is because what we do makes a difference. You can see if we do make a quick transition and if we do bring the policies forward and the programs and the individual actions, that we can leave a much better future. So the big takeaway, if you take nothing else away from this, if you think what we do can make a difference. So the other thing to think about is that we are at a crossroads. In the West, over the next 20 years, we're going to be investing about $200 billion in our electricity infrastructure. That's $200 billion with a B. And indecision is a decision, because if we keep investing in our same electricity infrastructure that we've invested in for the last 100 years, this is a system that's been serving us well for 100 years, but we have new technologies and new opportunities. And so we want to make sure that we're investing our dollars wisely and bringing us forward to a system that's much cleaner, much more resilient, is much more distributed renewable energy, and more efficiency. So Megan, I think if you saw her first CPACE slide, we think of energy efficiency as one of our most important resources. So how we use energy is as important as what energy we supply. We want to stop throwing money away, stop wasting our energy, because we're also then wasting emissions and pollution, needlessly causing pollution and needlessly warming our climate. We want more renewable energy. And I'll come back to this slide a little bit later, but we want to really embrace technology and the disruptive opportunities that we have available today. So from a policy side, you can think of it as an interplay of the federal government, the state government, Tyler's going to speak a little bit to the local government, and then programs and policies. One example of a great success that Utah has been our distributed solar, or rooftop solar industry. And you can see that the medium blue colors, those are state policy actions, including incentives, our A-grade net metering and interconnection standards. The dark blue are federal incentives, federal programs, and the green is programs. And you can see that through the implementation of these policies and programs, for the last 5 years, coupled with a great solar industry and declining prices, but for the last 5 years, we've seen exponential growth. We've been doubling the amount of installed solar nearly every single year, and we want to keep up that growth. This is kind of just a wordy slide, but I really wanted to let you know some of the incentives that are available today. The federal incentive, unfortunately, the investment tax credit for solar is set to expire at the end of 2016. It's scheduled to go back to a 10%, which I think would still be, given the declining prices, would still be very beneficial. The production tax credit for wind and geothermal has already expired, so only those projects that are already in the queue and being developed, the large projects, will be able to take advantage of that, unless the federal government decides that this is where we want to put some of our money. And then the state of Utah actually has some very good incentives. There's a residential tax credit of 25% up to $2,000 for residential renewable energy systems. A commercial tax credit of 10% up to $50,000. And then there are incentives for utility scale developments as well. A production tax credit of 0.35 cents a kilowatt hour for 4 years. It doesn't sound like enough, but very much, but it really can be the difference of making a project go. And then there's also the Utah Alternative Energy Tax Credit, and I looked for information about that to explain it. I couldn't find it on OED's website. I'm sure it's there, but it's a post-performance incentive where you're able to get get tax credit money that you would have been paying back. And then there's also a sales tax exemption for projects over 2 megawatts. So Utah has a pretty good suite of incentives. Renewable portfolio standards are really powerful ways to drive renewable energy. Utah has a renewable portfolio because actually it's a carbon reduction standard. But when Governor Huntsman worked on getting that passed, I think in 2006, there was an effort, I don't think it was very forward-thinking, on the part of some of the parties that were working on this bill and trying to stop this bill, to put in some really big loopholes. It allows renewable energy credits, which are kind of the renewable portion of an energy stream, to be counted all the way back to 1995. So although we have a decent standard on the books, because of these loopholes in that standard, it's not leading to any renewable energy development in the state. So if the state is interested in that, it has a requirement that they be cost effective. I don't think that's a problem. Renewables are cost effective. If we could just get rid of that loophole and actually have it drive the renewables, and it also allows efficiency to count, I think it would really be in the best interest of the time. And we spend a lot of time, so that's sort of a lot of the policy perspective, but we also, utility decisions are made through a regulatory framework and through what's called a Public Service Commission. So there are three people, commissioners, that are appointed by the governor and approved by the Senate. And then parties put information before them, and they have to rule on that information. So there's this whole sort of, under the policies, a regulatory framework that that interplays with utility resource decisions. So Rocky Mountain Power, Pacific Core, part of Berkshire Hathaway Energy, is just finishing their 2015 Integrated Resource Plan. And they do this every couple of years. They look at what are our best investments? How are we going to serve our energy load for the next 20 years? There are some things coming out of this plan not because of carbon regulation, but because of some air quality requirements and really old plants that would be expensive to upgrade. It's like upgrading an old jalopy. At some point you decide I just need to retire it. So in their 20-year planning horizon, they're going to retire 3,000 megawatts of coal plants. Unfortunately, their plan calls for just really a one-to-one replacement with natural gas and and 30 megawatts of new renewable energy, and that's solar. And that 30 megawatts, maybe, I don't know, how many homes is that? Maybe 50,000? So maybe that was enough to power 50,000 homes. So in a 20-year period, their plan only calls for them to invest in enough renewable energy for 50,000 homes over their state service territory, and that's a requirement by Oregon. So we think that it's a missed opportunity, and we hope that the utility will sharpen their pencils and look at their assumptions and really see the benefits that renewables can provide all of us, not just as ratepayers. We're ratepayers. When you buy a renewable energy project, you're buying 20 years of fuel up front, so you're locking in those rates. It's like having a bond in your investment portfolio. We hope that will change, but right now there's very little investment in renewables planned for the state of Utah. And I was recently at a presentation where Pacific Core presented on their business plan. I don't know how well you can see it. It's a scan of a hard document, but you can see that in the next 10 years, it doesn't change very much. Right now they have about 4% renewables. In 10 years they'll still have about 4% renewables. A little less coal in the mix and more natural gas. So there really isn't any plan changes, even though renewables are coming down in price dramatically. The one thing I will say that Pacific Core and Rocky Mountain Power are doing pretty well is they have great energy efficiency programs, and I encourage all of you to avail of the incentives that they have available for homes and businesses. They have a solar incentive program that Utah Clean Energy worked on getting through, so you can apply for that, although it's, I think it's pretty oversubscribed. So they are doing some things right, they're just not investing in renewable energy. So another sort of side of the regulatory realm is the Environmental Protection Agency. As I mentioned, some of their air quality regulations are leading to coal plant retirements of their oldest coal in the fleet. And so they are retiring some coal, but they're still over 50%. It's not like coal is going away anytime soon. But the EPA, how many have heard of the EPA Clean Power Plan? A number of you, or some people call it 111D. What it is greenhouse gas regulations for existing power plants. And it is, the final rule is expected out in the summer of 2015. And the emission reductions are tailored to each state. It's not a one-size-fits-all. They really look at what you could do in a state to cut emissions. It's not, they're not asking for draconian action. They also have, they allow flexible compliance paths. So if you're a state that really wants to build a lot of renewable energy or go gung-ho on energy efficiency, they also allow fuel switching to natural gas. It's completely flexible. So the state is in control of how we meet the emission reduction targets that are out in 2034, 30, I'm going blank on the actual year, but it is, it's about overall across the country a 30% reduction. What's interesting is even though Rocky Mountain Power and Pacific Core are publicly stating at the legislature and elsewhere that Utah doesn't need to do anything to comply, their planned approach is already going to comply. Unfortunately, the state of Utah and our legislature opposes this rule, even though it's a smart, sensible rule. I'm hoping that it will still be able to go through, but a lot of states are fighting this, even though it's a good start, as I would say. This is a good start policy. It's not going to get us all the way there, but I think the economics of solar and other renewables and efficiency will get us there. What is leading to development in Utah? So many of you, especially the students, your parents might not have even been alive in 1978. I looked for some women's fashion from 1978, and what's interesting is some of it's coming back, so it might not have looked so different, but it was a time of leisure suits for men, and it was a pretty crazy time. But back in 1978, there was a law passed, and it was called PURPA, and it's the Public Utilities Regulatory Policy Act. And there are a number of provisions, and one of the provisions is that monopoly utilities, they wanted to open the market so that independent power providers could sell to monopoly utilities, and they had to buy renewable energy at what's called avoided cost. So roll back a couple of years, and Utah Clean Energy was involved in a case before the Public Service Commission, that pre-commission panel I told you about. And we were able to, with some other parties, advocate for methodology changes, resulted in prices, pretty low prices, 5 cents, around 5 cents a kilowatt hour, locked in for 20 years. So that's a really good rate for a good deal for ratepayers. And this is daytime, summertime energy, and some is wind, but some of it's solar. And we have 500 megawatts of signed contracts that we hope will be developed in the state for solar and wind projects, over 500 megawatts. Google is financing the first project, and they've already broken ground. So that's an exciting mechanism that is from the 70s. Unfortunately, now Rocky Mountain Power and some of our other regulators are pushing for changes that would result in a lower price. And unfortunately for ratepayers and for renewable energy developers, that would pretty much stop this mechanism from working anymore in Utah, because you get much below 5 cents for a locked-in 20-year contract, and you just can't do these projects. Whereas we have no idea, natural gas was, now it's really cheap, but for any of you that were around in 2001, it was selling on, that power was selling on. So this equates to $50 a megawatt hour. Back when prices spiked, 10 years ago, it was $1,000 a megawatt hour. So we really think of these renewable projects that you're buying all your fuel up front as a great hedge, not to mention all the environmental benefits. The other thing, I'm sure, how many have heard of some of the attempted fees for rooftop solar and Some of you are tracking that, so a little bit, this is something that we're spending a lot of our time right now on. And so Rocky Mountain Power, in their rate case that they filed about a year or so, 2 years ago, they asked for new fees for rooftop solar. And after they did that, there was a legislative effort to sort of mandate that those new fees get through a number of parties and a number of different groups. And our legislature passed a smart policy that calls for a cost-benefit analysis so that we can really look at what benefits solar brings and what it costs. All we want is a fair rate structure for solar so that those that want to put solar on their roof can. And right now there's a case underway with a big hearing in October that will look at how we determine the cost and benefits of solar. And the reason I have this picture here, and Tyler might touch on some of this, is that we need to, when we look at the costs and benefits of solar, we need to look at it in a new view. We have to think about what our homes, what grid-side decisions that consumers and homes and businesses make, what value they can provide to the whole system. The utility does an amazing job of keeping the lights on for us all the time. And the thing with solar is, or with electricity, is there just isn't a lot of storage right now. So they are meeting that in real time. And our homes and businesses can become a huge benefit to the grid and to all ratepayers because we're starting to get smarter appliances. How many of you have heard of Rocky Mountain Power's Cool Keeper program where they let them control your air conditioner? Some of you have. That's a way that they are able to meet our electricity demands in the summertime when they're their highest in the cheapest way. And so as we get these smarter appliances, as solar with smarter inverters, which are already out there and they're using them in Hawaii, combine that with just a little bit of storage. So let's say I have a home and I don't want storage to back up my whole house, but I want a little bit of storage maybe for my most crucial things. And I give Rocky Mountain Power permission to draw from that storage between 6 and 8 when the sun's going down, but when their demands are the greatest in residential neighborhoods. That's a huge benefit. So we can't just kind of look at solar in the way, this traditional way that we always have. We have to be really creative as we look at the cost of benefits and as what the grid could look like going forward. So this is really the end. Utah is one of the 7 sunniest states in the country. We have a good wind resource, we have good geothermal resources. It's sort of our decision and our policymakers' decision whether or not we tap into that potential. We have, when we saw that big growth, but we're still only at 20 megawatts of solar, so we have a long way to go. We'll hold questions till the end, but thank you, and feel free to call on Utah Clean Energy anytime that you want to know about renewable energy or energy efficiency policy in the state. So thank you.
Okay, so as I didn't mention, my name is Tyler Polson. I work in the Salt Lake City Division of Sustainability. I work primarily on energy and climate programs for the city, including both municipal operations and facilities as well as community level action areas, policy and renewable energy development, that sort of thing. And what I'm not going to talk about today are programs, policies, and projects that the city has very specifically done. I'm not going to talk about rooftop solar or public safety building, the solar field, what we've done to support installations of solar at the community level. Instead, I want to talk more about the mindset and the vision and the inherent potential that the city sees that has us genuinely excited about the future of renewables and the reality today for renewable energy in Utah and Salt Lake City. And just kind of starting with the big picture, community level greenhouse gas emissions. The city did its inventory a number of years ago. This is what the 2009 community greenhouse gas inventory looked like. And as you can see, around 54% of the emissions are associated with electricity usage. Taking that a step further, an additional 17% are associated with diesel and gasoline, primarily for on-road vehicle travel. And so when you see plans or ambitions around transitioning to a low-carbon economy, a low-carbon community, or a net zero community, the way that those are facilitated are first and foremost cutting out energy waste, but then secondarily transitioning to low-carbon energy generating resources and doing it for the electricity sector, and then transitioning on-road vehicle fleet to electric vehicles and having them be powered by clean electricity. So we have a very strong vested interest in where our electrons come from if we are to make progress on climate goals. Sarah touched on this. This is just the same information photographed in a different graphic, but this is Utah's energy mix. As you can see, it's primarily fossil fuel based. We have about 4.69% for renewable energy. The other graphic to consider here is PacifiCorp's energy mix. So what they're generating across their multi-state region, and ultimately what they're serving Salt Lake City with. And with PacifiCorp's energy mix, as you can see, there's a larger renewable energy component. A lot of hydro in the Pacific Northwest and other areas contribute to that, but it's still largely fossil fuel based, 85% or so, if you're total all up fossil fuel based. And so ultimately what that means is that for every kilowatt hour of electricity that's generated, there's 1.66 pounds of carbon dioxide equivalent. A great way to think about this is what that means to the average household. So the average household in Utah on a daily basis for its home energy needs, electricity and natural gas, consumes about 17 pounds of coal equivalent, 208 cubic feet of natural gas. So think about each ball being roughly a cubic foot, 208 of it per day. So over the course of a year, you're looking at 6,200 pounds of coal, 76,000 each balls of natural gas average. So it's an extraordinary amount, almost unbelievable amount, but that's the literal inputs to creating our energy reality in Utah today. So we kind of get this sense, we get this sense locally in Salt Lake, we get it statewide and nationally. I think people have this understanding as well, and they acknowledge it in different ways. One thing I looked at prior to this presentation was a study that was done, or a survey that was done in 2015 by Stanford University and USA Today. They jointly put out a poll, and they asked the question about, do you think X energy resource is a good idea? So, softball question, let's just generally gauge attitudes. And you know what? Most Americans, 91%, felt that solar energy was a good idea. No partisanship associated with that result necessarily. I'm sure you got to know there a little bit, but 91% think solar is a good idea generally. Looking at the fossil fuel-based resources, looking at coal, natural gas, and then also looking at nuclear in that mix, no greater than 50% responded that any of those individually were a good idea. And the attitude bottomed out at coal, with 22% of Americans saying coal is a good idea compared to solar. For Utah attitudes, this is a poll that was published just this year, Should we continue taxpayer support for solar and wind energy production? In Utah, 69% of respondents said, yes, we should continue. It's nearly 7 out of 10 in very red states say, I want renewable energy, and not only that, I think we should support renewable energy. I think we should show much preference for renewable energy in terms of how we fund those energy sources. On a national level, the question, do you support carbon tax? So the University of Michigan put out a poll with a variety of questions and asked, do you support carbon tax? Well, 34% of Americans said, yes, I support carbon tax. So not too many, roughly a third. But they had a question, the exact same audience, do you support a carbon tax if it's used to fund programs for renewable power? To that question, 60% of Americans, including 51% of Republican respondents, said they would actually support a carbon tax to fund renewable energy. So a little more on that later. But this may be the most beautiful graphic in my entire presentation scheme. And what it is, on the left axis, it's showing annual photovoltaic installations by category, residential versus non-residential versus utility scale. And you see that outstanding growth trend. On the right, what adds, in my opinion, the beauty of this graphic is the weighted average system price. progress, how much it costs per watt to install solar, and you see that downward dipping trend. During one of the keynotes today, they alluded to solar panels have dropped 80% in cost since 2008, which is true. A little more stickiness here when it comes to the overall system weighted costs. So you have labor inputs and other things that don't allow the cost to go down that much, but you see significant progress in terms of cost of renewable energy. There's an outstanding article that was published years ago in Scientific American, and they asked the question, does something called Moore's Law apply to solar technology? And what Moore's Law is it's a technology term, and it's the number of components you can fit on a microchip. And Moore's Law said that every 18 months you're going to be able to double the amount of components on a single microchip. And it was proposed decades ago, and it's held to this day, and not only held, it's accelerated. So now you're having double the amount of components on a chip in a 12-month time frame. And that's translated into more practical terms, the cost in terms of computing power falling by about half on every 18 months and then every 12-month spectrum. And so they compare solar to computing and have some great analysis around Moore's Law and what that means. So meet a solar panel. A solar panel is roughly 6 feet in height, a little bit shorter than me, 3 feet wide, weighs 45 pounds. You can buy one on eBay from a name brand manufacturer for about $250 for a 300 watt. 300 watts is going to produce enough power to power about 10 computer monitors. Primarily made of silicone and glass, aluminum frame. That is your solar panel. But a solar panel really is the modern day equivalent of the engine that could. Solar technology has warranties that I think are unparalleled in any other industry. The industry standard for a solar panel is you're going to get a 25-year power output warranty. And what that means for a lot of manufacturers, they'll say that in the 25th year after this thing's installed, it's going to be putting out at least 80% of its original production value, if not better. On top of that, over its 25-year lifetime, a single solar panel is going to produce just over 10,000 kilowatt hours of electricity in Utah, given our solar installation. 10,000 kilowatt hours. To generate the equivalent amount of electricity using coal would require 11,000 pounds. So you're looking at 6 foot tall, 45-pound solar panel displacing the need for generating using 11,000 pounds of coal over its life cycle. So from an economic perspective, it's pretty clear that the writing's on the wall. I mean, the cost trends around solar are downward trend. It's only going to improve. The cost trends around fossil fuel finite energy fluctuating, but in the long term, upward seeking. What is that translated into today? This study was out of North Carolina, and they looked at the 50 largest cities in the country. And what they found was that rooftop solar for residential customers is cheaper than 42 of 50 major U.S. cities. And the way that they did it is they did it using models they call levelized cost of energy. So what does it cost per kilowatt hour, including the cost of financing? And so they said, okay, over the solar panel's warranty lifetime, let's apply 5% financing terms on this thing, and then throw it on the roof and then compare it to what costs would be offset on the retail side for electricity not purchased. In 42 of 50 major U.S. cities, solar is currently the cheaper option. So who in the room owns a cell phone? So 90%, roughly 90% of American adults own a cell phone. The majority of those own a smartphone. How many people do you think would own a smartphone that costs $27,000? Who would own a smartphone that costs $27,000? So the reason I ask is if you think about a smartphone as a service, you think about the cost of owning a smartphone. At $90 a month over 25 years for your service, it's going to cost you $27,000 to own that phone for 25 years. And so with the solar panel, it's not a question of upfront cost being a barrier or technology. It's more a question of financing the technology itself. And so with that, you see it. You see that bear out in the trends of the data around the country. This was part of a study where they were analyzing third-party ownership levels for solar panels. And so there's two primary types that we're looking at. One being the solar lease, where a third party comes in, they throw panels on your home for business, and you pay them for those panels over time. The other being something called a power purchase agreement, where someone comes in at no cost, throws solar panels on your roof, and you pay them for the energy that's generated over time. Third-party ownership is one of the greatest indicators of whether a state is succeeding or treading water or failing in terms of solar development. The top 10 solar development states in the country all have third-party financing enabled. Utah is actually listed as a state with third-party financing enabled. It is on some level. It's not enabled for residential. Power purchase agreements aren't allowed for commercial, but we got our name on there. The numbers on the graphic, they indicate the megawatts of solar installed per million people. So forget that term and just think the units of energy per capita associated with each state. So you see Utah in there, sitting right around 2. Not very impressive relative to our neighbors. So if you're a Utah, and this is your little solar panel that could, how does that compare to a state like Arizona? In Arizona, you're looking at about 57.5 to 1 ratio in terms of solar panels installed per capita. That's Arizona, right? Like, saw the map. We're one of the best solar states. Arizona is outstanding, out of this world. What about New Jersey? More solar installation here, we're better equipped to generate solar power here in Utah. What about New Jersey? 47.5 to 1 per capita solar panels in the state of New Jersey. It's driven by policies. It's driven by policies and preferences, expressing a preference for renewable energy and bearing that out through policy mechanisms. But fortunately, at this point, the tide really turned. Things turned in favor of renewable energy, and it's not pulling back. If you wanted to see outstanding objective reports that analyze the current state of the economics of renewables, look no further than the banks. The National Bank of Abu Dhabi just published this report this week. It was a report that they commissioned, and it was drafted by the University of Cambridge. And what they found was that 80% of countries globally, solar is going to be at grid parity, at grid cost or better within the next 2 years. And it's a trend that's only going to accelerate to incorporate 100% of countries over time. And so that's the outstanding thing is the tide has turned. We're ready to develop this energy resource and move forward. One thing I would add that it was a part of this report actually, it's not part of the headline, is kind of what's being the holy grail now in energy in a lot of ways. And that's energy storage. Solar, wind, these are intermittent resources. They fit in and of themselves displace baseload fossil fuel generating plants. So there still is that consideration. The report itself from the National Bank of Abu Dhabi gets into the cost of lithium-ion batteries and some of the other storage mechanisms and the economics around that. We're certainly trending behind the Moore's Law type curve that you're seeing with solar panels, but they're accelerating and moving in that direction. So kind of the takeaways for the city, and I think for this whole concept in general, are one is the solar energy is not the energy of tomorrow, it's the energy of today. Should set limitations on what it can do, what it means for us today. But then right alongside that, there's just this increasing awareness and acknowledgement of the policies and pricing that really dictate whether clean energy gets developed. In Utah, Sarah had that great graphic about FERPA and that law allowing access for large-scale clean energy projects to the grid. So it's not a question of interconnection, it's more a question of do we value renewable energy? Do we value that energy resource? The same thing on rooftop and residential. What components of value do we care about public health impacts, and do we want to move forward and quantify and incorporate those things into the analysis? Do we care about carbon emissions? And do we want to incorporate a reasonable, even conservative estimate of what carbon emissions cost economies and societies and incorporate that into solar pricing? And so this really is, I paint this outstanding, brilliant, optimistic picture about renewable energy. It's all true. But if you don't get the pricing right, let alone if you take a step backwards in regards to how you're pricing, valuing clean energy resources, you're going to stifle what happens. And it's going to be done, right in front of a public, an audience in Utah that values renewable energy, way more for renewable energy and a national audience that values renewable energy above other energy resources. So kind of in closing, the question isn't, are we going to transition to renewable energy? It's going to happen. There's no doubt about it. The only outstanding question at that level is, how quickly are we going to do it? And at that point, what damage will we have prevented? And so it's a lot to consider, but it's completely avoidable. If the collective will, the vision, and the foresight to access this cost-effective resource. So with that, open it up for questions.
I heard that Libyan sponsored a bill this year for PPAs, but I never heard how it went. Go to that. I guess that's for you, Sarah.
So Vivian did work to move a bill that would have allowed third-party financing for both residential and commercial systems, and it did not get very far. Rocky Mountain Power, the utility, our investor in utility, sort of put a stop to it. I think that it will be discussed over interim. Vivint has started a program of leasing this year. So I think that with just word of mouth, they sold 300 systems in about a month. So whether or not they'll decide to go forward and try it again, or whether they'll just use leasing, which is allowed here, is a question.
You think leasing will help drive more rooftop solar?
I think it can. It's just in a PPA is a little easier sell. It's more straightforward. But leasing can do the exact same thing, where you don't have to pay up front, but you pay for it over time, and it's linked to energy production. So we'll see what happens, and they just broke ground on a new facility near Thanksgiving Point as well. So, and plus, we have a great solar industry that's putting solar without leasing or PPAs, and I think there's room for both models. Rocky Mountain Power is buying that power through that 1978 law where they're required to do. So, they're not investing in it, but they are buying it from that plant. Any other questions? Could you say that again? So it's interesting, across the country, utilities are concerned about solar. And part of that, I talked a little bit about that 100-year-old model. It's designed for one-way flow of electricity. They make their profit. They make an 18% profit on their capital investments. That's the before tax, 10% after taxes profit on what's called prudent investments. So if we're putting in a lot of solar, if the people and the companies of Utah are putting in a lot of solar, that's capital investments they don't need to make, and that's a rate of return that they don't make. And how they collect that is through rates, through selling electricity. So there is concern on the behalf of the utilities. We're hopeful that we can start looking to the future and saying a model that was developed 100 years ago maybe isn't the best financial model for the disruptive technologies we see today. But yes, Rocky Mountain Power is concerned about rooftop solar, as are a lot of utilities, except for I don't know if the woman from NRG is still here. NRG is one of the most progressive utilities in the country, and they are embracing renewables.
So Solar City filed a lawsuit with its solar project in Arizona. This week, maybe late last week. How do you see the outcome of that case affecting solar?
You know, I'm not well versed enough in that specific case, but this is playing out all over the country, and so we're hopeful that we can get a really fair cost-benefit analysis, but we need our utility regulators to sort of understand solar's potential, which I don't think they do yet. You know, a lot of people don't. I mean, Tyler, the charts that Tyler showed, it's you know, a sea change right now, and it's really disruptive. So we'll have to wait and see, but we hope everyone will get involved and let our Public Service Commission know that we want to see more solar and we want a fair rates.
How do you deal with the utility argument that the one putting additional power into their system, intermittent power into their system is a problem, and then also that they don't want to become just a distribution.
So there's two questions there. The first question has to do with the technology and the interplay, and we're so low in penetration that there really isn't an impact yet. But to be honest, in Hawaii, there have been some impacts where they have really high penetrations. And what's interesting in Hawaii, 60% of the systems have what these little microinverters, and they've been able to, the company that makes these microinverters has been able to program them from afar, and with the flip of a switch, make it easier to integrate that into the grid for the utility. So there are technologies, and then also they're developing one with storage that will be out probably by the end of the year, I think, Brock, is that right? So we can overcome the technology side. And what was the second half of your question?
They don't want to become just distribution.
You know, it's sort of like, think of our landlines, you know, and the telephone companies. I mean, technology will change things. We need them, and we will need a grid to be there for us, because I don't think it's in everyone's best interest to go off the grid and have storage. So that's what I'm talking about. We need to think of a better financial and regulatory model that rewards the utility for performance, not so much for generating electrons and delivering them, or for big capital investment. So it's not an easy solution, but there are really smart people across the country working on this. And we just need utilities to start stepping up and saying, okay, I see the writing on the wall, let's figure something out that's fair for consumers, that drives the technologies that we need to see, and that enables us to stay, you know, to be a viable business. So New York is working on a big, they have a big open docket to look at sort of the utility of the future and how that will all work. And one other state, I'm going blank on going that, but New York's is the best example and maybe the farthest along. You know, I'm not sure of the whole rate structure, but they're the ones that are looking at sort of the big picture, how we transition to a clean energy economy and how we keep our utilities viable. It's not done yet, it's just, they're just getting started on this case.